Hi everyone, Amanda here from the Resume RX. By very popular demand, I'm going to be giving you an overview of how I personally paid off my student loans. Basically, I paid off $133,000 of nursing student loans in just 7 years, and I'm going to let you know about my story and how I accomplished that. So many of you know that I am a nurse practitioner. I did an undergraduate degree in a different field. So I'm a second degree nurse or nurse practitioner, as we're referred to. So I was very fortunate to do my undergraduate work in a different field, liberal arts, and I did not graduate with any loans. So in 2008, I graduated from undergrad without any student debt. So my student loan journey really began when I entered nursing in NP school. And I did complete a program that was a combined program. So I went right from my RN into my NP program, and I did that at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, which was a fantastic program, but as you can imagine, came with a pretty hefty price tag. I did get some scholarships, but at the end of the day, between what I took out for my tuition and also what I took out for my living expenses, I graduated with about $110,000 of federal student loans. So those were a mixture between Grad Plus loans, Stafford loans, Perkins loans. I did not take out any private loans, so these were all federal loans. And very soon after I graduated in 2011, I went into repayment, meaning I had to start paying back those loans. Flash forward to 2011, I've graduated. I start my first nurse practitioner job in August of 2011, and I go into repayment in December. My first nurse practitioner job was a pretty low paying job. I moved to a low cost of living area in the country that as a result had pretty low nurse practitioner salaries, and my starting NP salary was about $70,000 a year. So what I did was I entered the income-based loan repayment program. For federal loans, basically where you, rather than paying the full amount required to pay off in 10 years, you pay a percentage of your income as your new loan payment, and that basically gets recertified every year. So as your income goes up, your loan payments go up. So that's what I started to do. I just paid the income-based payment. I don't remember what it was at the time, but I just kind of accepted the fact that these loans were going to be there, and I moved forward. At that time, also, the concept of public service loan forgiveness was being talked about, which is a government program that does still exist. And to summarize that, it's basically if you work 10 years full-time for a nonprofit organization in a healthcare field like nursing, advanced practice nursing, that type of thing, you pay 120 payments, which is 10 years of payments while working full-time of your income-based payment, which changes as your income changes, and then the rest are forgiven. So that was my plan, kind of going into my career, was that I knew that it would take a while for my income to go up. So I just kind of accepted that I was going to be working full-time for 10 years, making those payments and hoping to get things paid off after those 10 years. After a couple of years, I started to get a little bit nervous about my loans. I kept checking the balance, and even though I was making these income-based payments every month, the total balance was still going up, which meant that my payments were so low, I wasn't even covering the interest, and that really scared me as I thought about my future. In the meantime, I got married. My husband and I talked about starting a family, and I kept thinking, like, what if I want to take time off from work at some point? What if I don't want to work full-time for 10 years? What if, our circumstances change? Do I really want to have this debt hanging over my head for the next 10 years? And the answer to those questions was no. So I decided to do something about it. And in 2013, I got a second job. I had not considered that as a possibility before. Like, when the idea hit me, it was kind of like oh, duh, I don't just have to work this one job. Why don't I get a second job? So I picked up a per diem job working in an emergency department, which was a field I had always been interested in. And basically what I did was I asked I asked around in my current hospital network that I was working for if they were hiring nurse practitioners in the emergency department, and turns out they were. They were more than happy to have someone who was not trained in the field, and I got a ton of on-the-job, side-by-side training with the physicians who owned the group. So for about a year, I was working my full-time job as a nurse practitioner, and then I was working a side job as an NP on pretty much the weekends. So most weekends I was working at least 10 to 12 hours, and all of that extra money was going towards debt. I increased the student loan payments. Then eventually I decided to take on that job as my primary full-time job because I enjoyed it so much. But what I did was I worked a lot of overtime because I knew that the more I worked, the more money I could make, the more money I could put towards my loans. So I really ramped up my income as much as possible. I made sure I was meeting my productivity goals. There was a little bit of a bonus structure built in. So that was really great. In 2015, we moved to a new state where I continued to work in emergency medicine. I continued to work full-time plus overtime, and all my extra money would go towards debt. And at that point, I learned more about a government scholarship program called Nurse Corps, which was a program that was based on your debt to income ratio. So at that point, I was still, a lot of my payment was still going towards interest. So my balance hadn't really gone down very much. I think I still, in 2015, owed around $100,000, maybe $105,000, based on like all the income or all the interest that had accumulated plus the debt that we had paid down already. So I applied for this scholarship, and it's completely based on your debt to income ratio. And since I still owed more than what I made in a year, because my salary had not yet reached $100,000 a year, I was a really highly qualified candidate. And the other thing that was highly qualifying was the fact that I worked in an area that had a high health provider shortage area score. So basically it was an underserved community, an underserved hospital. So the fact that I was working in an underserved area and I had a very high debt to income ratio made me a top qualifier for this scholarship program. So I started that in 2015. Basically what that did was there was a lump sum of money that they paid towards the loans, but it was distributed over the course of 2 years. So basically every month for 2 years, I would get a direct deposit from the government as a scholarship. And I was required to take that money and put it directly towards my loan repayment. So that's what I started in late 2015. Now what I did was, because I was still so determined to get things paid off, I took not only the money that they were giving me as the scholarship money, which to me was free money, but I still made additional payments on top of that. So for the duration of this scholarship, essentially, I was making double payments on the loans. So by August of 2016, even with all that money, I had gotten the balance down to $95,000. I continued to work overtime until my babies were born, my twins who were born in 2016. I took a decent 4-month maternity leave, and what I did was when I went back to work, I continued to work full-time, but I went to full-time nights so that I could increase my pay a little bit. And also, whenever I picked up overtime on nights, it was a higher differential. So I tried to bump up my income where I could, but I wasn't working nearly as much overtime as I could with the babies because that was really challenging. So by August of 2017, the balance was down to $75,000. I was still getting scholarship payments. I was still paying almost just as much from my own money to make really high monthly payments on the loans. January of 18, I think I was like towards the end of the scholarship program, but my balance was pretty low on my loans. And actually I've got my tracker here. Part of what kept me motivated was keeping track of the amount and how it was decreasing. So I made this tracker, if you can see, it's basically little blocks that have amounts, and whenever I reached that amount, whenever I decreased the balance, I would fill in the square. So in January of 2018, it was down to $53,000. The scholarship was wrapping up, and at that point, I decided to go part-time at work. And between January of 18 and August of 18, we got super intense with paying down the debt, and it was all paid off by August of 2018. We paid that in full. In the interim, we had paid off our vehicles, and at that point, the only debt we carried was our mortgage. So it was definitely a situation of keeping our eyes on the prize, and it afforded me a lot of flexibility professionally. So being able to be debt-free, this is 7 years after I started working. I paid off the $133,000. So at that point, I was able to stay part-time, which really afforded me more time with my kids, which was a really high priority for me. At that point, I no longer felt enslaved to my job. I no longer felt obligated or resentful. I had gotten to the point where I felt really resentful of the work I was doing because I felt like I was putting in all this effort. I was working all this extra time, but I couldn't keep any of the money because I knew that I had to get out from underneath this debt burden. So once I got out from underneath it, I started to have a different perspective on my job with much more appreciation for it. And much more appreciation for my income, which was finally like mine. I could finally figure out, how to distribute that amongst our family obligations and our savings obligations. So that really kind of changed the game for me, so to speak. So it really kind of left me thinking that I could do whatever I wanted professionally in terms of how much I wanted to work, what setting I wanted to work in. I didn't have to be working full-time, which was this obligation of all these other loan repayment programs. It meant that we didn't need as much money coming in on a regular basis. So if I wanted to reduce my schedule, we would be just fine because we got used to living on this lower amount of money because so much of our money was going towards debt. And now that money goes towards savings and kids' obligations and that type of thing. So I want to encourage you that it's possible that you don't have to be a slave to your student loans forever, but it is smart to kind of have a strategy behind it. And because this is such a hot topic and so many people have asked me about this, I decided to run a free class. That'll be a live class later this month. And in that class, I'm going to break down basically a 5-step blueprint that you can follow that's applicable to pretty much everyone about how exactly to get more strategic with paying off your student loans. Because you'll find that once you pay off your loans, doors will open for you in a different way. You'll have a different perspective on your life and on your finances. And if you ever feel burdened by the decisions that you're able to make financially or you're not able to make financially, or if you ever feel like you're going to be working for the rest of your life, paying off your loans can really change that perspective. Personally, for a while, I won't be going back to full-time clinical work. I have another baby on the way, and I know that I can take the time that I want to with her and with my kids. And maybe when all my kids are in full-time school, I'll go back to working full-time, or maybe I won't. I'll have that option because of how I've decided to structure my life financially. So I want to tell you a lot more about the process and about the steps that you can take to get a plan in place to do the same thing. So I hope that you will join me. I'm going to drop a link here in the description. I'm going to be sharing information about this class a couple more times over the next week or so because I want you to be able to feel empowered to take back your professional life, take back your financial life, and have some hope, because I know that I didn't have a lot of hope when I started, and I certainly shocked myself when I was able to get it done. So that's what I want for you too. Private message me, DM me with any questions, or if you want the link to the sign up for the class, I'm happy to get that to you. But otherwise, let me know if this was helpful. I hope that this gave you some inspiration, and I hope to see you on the class.